Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something really quite extraordinary. A text so personal, so raw, its author actually hid behind a pseudonym at first.
That's right. We're talking about C.S. Lewis, but maybe not the Lewis you immediately think of. Not the Narnia creator or the confident voice of mere Christianity.
No, this is Lewis the man, completely shattered by loss. We're diving deep into his journal of bereavement, a grief observed.
And it's utterly searing. He refers to his late wife, Joy Davidman, simply as H throughout, and publishing it as N.W. Clerk. Well, he genuinely seemed to think his public persona, the great Christian apologist, couldn't withstand this level of honesty about his doubt and, frankly, his despair.
That pseudonym, N.W. Clerk, it tells you so much right from the start. This isn't Lewis the academic carefully constructing an argument like he did years before in The Problem of Pain.
No, not at all. That book looked at suffering from, shall we say, a safe distance, a grief observed. This is written from right inside the furnace. It's immediate, unfiltered.
So our main source today is Lewis's own journal. Uncompromising stuff. But we're also bringing in some context, right?
Yeah.
From people who knew him well.
Absolutely. We've got insights from his stepson, Douglas Gresham, who provides really valuable personal perspective, and also reflections from the author Madeleine L'Engle. Both thought deeply about Lewis and this specific experience.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive, we really want to unpack the anatomy of Lewis's grief. It's not just sadness, is it? He talks about these strange physical symptoms, intellectual struggles.
Oh, definitely. We'll look at all that and crucially trace the arc of his crisis of faith. It was profound. And how that crisis ultimately, it shattered and then reshaped his understanding of everything love, memory, God himself.
We have to start, I think, where Douglas Gresham insists we should, with the title. It's a grief observed.
Yes. But the A is critical. It's not grief observed, like some kind of objective study. It's one man's grief, his specific, unique, moment-by-moment attempt to just get to grips with this shattering loss. It wasn't written for us, really.
It was for him, a way to order his thoughts.
Exactly. We're essentially looking over his shoulder as he wrestles with this immense silence in his own soul. It's quite a privilege, actually.
Right. So to really understand the depth of that wrestling match in the journal, we first need to get a handle on the relationship he lost. It wasn't exactly your typical Oxford Dawn love story, was it?
No. Far from it. It was exceptional, almost improbable. And it really began on an intellectual level, which is fascinating in itself. Lewis, or Jack, as his friends called him, his mind was just immense.
A powerhouse.
Totally. And few people, even in his own circle, like the Inklings, could truly keep pace with him intellectually. And then along comes Joy Davidman, H. And she was, quite possibly, the only woman he ever met who was genuinely his intellectual equal.
Wow. That's quite a statement. What made them such equals?
Well, for starters, both apparently had total recall, photographic memories. They just didn't forget things they'd read, imagined conversations between them. And maybe even more importantly, their journeys to faith were remarkably similar. Both came to Christianity the long way round, through atheism, agnosticism. It was a hard-won, reasoned faith for both of them, an intellectual conquest as much as a spiritual arrival.
But personality-wise.
Yeah.
Very different backgrounds.
Oh, completely different worlds. Lewis was, middle class, Irish English, early 20th century upbringing. Very structured, formal in some ways, that sort of chivalrous outlook.
And Joy.
Joy Davidman, lower middle class Jewish immigrant family, born and raised in the Bronx, New York City. Fiercely intelligent, yes, but also incredibly direct, unconventional, didn't suffer fools gladly.
Yeah.
Just worlds apart on the surface.
It makes you think, like Gresham points out, sometimes the most unlikely pairings create something really powerful, that merging of opposites.
Exactly. Gresham talks about God bringing together these seemingly disparate people and creating this deep spiritual and emotional bond, marriage as a kind of alchemy.
But the shadow hanging over this incredible connection, the thing that makes the grief journal so particularly painful, is that Lewis knew their time was limited.
Yes, that's the brutal reality. He married Joy knowing she had advanced cancer. They had this incredible, unexpected period of remission, a kind of false spring, he calls it somewhere, I think.
Which must have made the bond even deeper and the eventual loss even harder.
Absolutely. That remission allowed their love to truly blossom, but the clock was always ticking. Madeleine L'Engle has such a poignant way of describing this.
What does she say?
Well, Lange was married for 40 years, a long, full life together. She saw that as the full feast, the banquet you expect. But Lewis's marriage, because he went into it knowing Joy was dying, she calls it just a taste.
Like getting the appetizers.
Exactly, like sampling the hors d'oeuvres and then having the whole banquet just rudely snatched away. He only got a glimpse of what that long-term partnership could be.
And Gresham, who saw them together, he talks about their love growing into this almost visible incandescence.
Yeah, a brightness, a power, but always, always tinged with sadness and fear, because they both knew, rationally, scientifically, that it couldn't last. The beauty and the tragedy were completely intertwined.
So when the end did come, the loss, Lewis describes it in a way that L'Engle also recognized from her own eventual widowhood. He calls it an amputation.
It's such a visceral word, and Lewis really pushes back against easy answers here. He gets impatient, like many believers do, with people who sort of imply death isn't a big deal if you believe in heaven.
Right, the sort of, oh, well, she's in a better place sentiment.
Precisely. Lewis insists, no, death matters. It's a real separation, a real wound here and now. Even with faith in eternity, the amputation analogy holds. Something vital has been cut off.
L'Engle does point out a difference, though, that Lewis went into the marriage expecting death relatively soon, unlike someone losing a partner after decades.
True, the context is different, but that raw feeling, the physical sense of loss, like a missing limb, that seems utterly universal. And that's the immediate reality Lewis is grappling with in the journal.
Okay, so we understand the intensity of the love and the loss, but the journal then moves into describing the immediate aftermath, and it's surprisingly physical, isn't it?
Yeah.
He describes grief almost like an illness.
He really does. And that opening observation just hits you. No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear.
Yeah.
And he's very clear. He's not saying he's afraid, not intellectually, but the sensations are identical. He lists them. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning, I keep on swallowing. It's pure physiology.
Like his body is in fight or flight mode, but there's no visible threat.
Exactly, just this overwhelming absence. He also talks about feeling mildly drunk or concussed, dislocated, and that image of the invisible blanket between the world and me.
Everything muffled.
Yeah, muted. So uninteresting, he says. But then there's that contradiction, isn't there? He finds conversation dull, yet he dreads the moments when the house is empty.
So he wants people around, but doesn't want to interact.
Kind of. He wants the background noise, the presence, the proof that life is still happening. But he doesn't want the demand of engaging. He wants company, maybe, but not participation. It's a very specific kind of loneliness.
And then there's that other symptom he notes, which seems counterintuitive, the laziness of grief.
Right, this profound inertia. He says, apart from his work, which runs on autopilot after decades, he just loathes any effort. Shaving, reading a letter, tidying up. It's all too much.
He uses that analogy, doesn't he, about being cold in bed.
He does. It's so relatable. You're freezing. You know a blanket would help, but he'd rather lie there shivering than get up and find one. That captures it perfectly, this preference for passive suffering over the effort of seeking comfort.
Which explains his observation about why the lonely often become untidy. It's just too much work to keep up appearances.
It's the energy drain of grief itself.
Yeah.
But beyond the physical side, there's this intense internal battle going on, too, about self-pity.
He really despises that, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He catches himself sometimes having these moments of thinking, oh, maybe I'll cope okay, trying to rationalize it. I shan't do so badly.
A little bit of hopeful thinking.
Yeah, but then bam, he calls it a sudden jab of red-hot memory, and all that fragile common sense just evaporates.
And he prefers the pain.
In a way, yes. He says the clean agony is at least clean and honest. What he hates is the bath of self-pity, calling it a loathsome, sticky, sweet pleasure. He finds it morally repulsive.
Because it distorts the reality of H.
Exactly. That's his big fear, that wallowing in his own misery will turn the real woman into a mere doll to be blubbered over. He's fighting tooth and nail in those early pages just to remember her accurately.
How does he describe her, the real H?
With such intellectual respect. Her mind was lithe and quick and muscular as a leopard, always ready to pounce on sloppy thinking. She could scent the first whiff of cant or slush and just expose it.
High praise from Lewis.
The highest. He even says he was never less silly than as H's lover. She kept him honest. Losing her wasn't just losing love. It was losing that vital, critical mirror that prevented him from, indulging his own intellectual laziness or sentimentality.
That loss of the other, the check on his own thoughts.
Precisely. But then there's the difficulty of sharing this grief, the isolation, especially with his stepsons.
Right, he mentions trying to talk about age, and they just get embarrassed. They want him to stop.
Yeah, he says it's fatal, embarrassment, and he kind of understands it, remembers feeling similarly after his own mother died. It's the way boys are, he says.
But Gresham adds important context here.
Crucial context. Douglas Gresham explains it wasn't about lack of love for their mother at all. It was the conditioning of their British boarding school.
The stiff upper lip.
Absolutely. The ultimate shame was to be seen crying in public. So the boys were terrified that if Lewis talked about H, they would cry, and Lewis would cry, and it would unleash this deep cultural taboo they'd been trained to avoid at all costs.
So they were trying to protect everyone from that shame. Wow, that changes everything. It's not callousness, it's cultural programming.
It's pure pathos, really, a failure of the culture to allow for necessary grief. And Lewis felt this isolation more broadly, too, didn't he?
Yeah, feeling like an embarrassment to everyone I meet. The widower as this awkward reminder of mortality.
It's a common experience, unfortunately. Which brings us back to why he was writing the journal in the first place. He calls it his terrible little notebook.
A necessary drug, he says.
Yes, a defense mechanism. He realized that a big part of suffering isn't just the suffering itself, but the fact that you don't merely suffer but have to keep on thinking about the fact that you suffer. That endless loop.
Like watching yourself suffer.
Exactly. And by writing it all down, analyzing it, dissecting it, he felt he could get a little outside it. Stop the obsessive meta-thinking about the pain and just focus on the pain itself. The journal was his escape hatch from that feedback loop. Okay, so we've seen the physical toll, the struggle with memory and self-pity, the social isolation, but the absolute core of grief observed, the part that still resonates so powerfully, is the intellectual and spiritual crisis. This is Lewis the believer facing the abyss.
And it hits him right away, doesn't it? That feeling of praying into a void.
Oh, immediately. It's devastating. He asks, where is God? He says, you go to God in your moment of total desperation when nothing else helps, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face and a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside.
Silence. No lights on. Nothing.
It's an incredibly bleak image. Here's the man who built a career explaining God's presence and goodness, and he finds an impenetrable wall. An absence.
And the real fear for him, he says, isn't that God doesn't exist, it's worse.
Much worse. The terror isn't becoming an atheist, it's the horrifying thought. So this is what God's really like. Deceive yourself no longer. It's believing God exists, but that he's cruel or indifferent.
That realization makes him just tear down all the easy answers the platitudes people offer.
Completely. He starts questioning the very foundation, the idea that God is good in any way we understand it. His logic is brutal. If God's goodness can't coexist with this level of pain, then either God isn't good or he doesn't exist, because the pain is undeniably real.
But then the flip side is terrifying too.
Even more so. If God's goodness is somehow compatible with inflicting this agony, then what's to stop him from continuing to inflict it after death? The comfort of heaven suddenly seems uncertain. The rules he thought he knew no longer apply.
This leads him down a really dark path, exploring that idea of God as, what does he call it, a cosmic sadist?
Yeah, a cosmic sadist, an eternal vivisector, pretty extreme language. And what really fuels this nightmare, he admits, is remembering all the false hopes.
The remissions, the positive signs.
Exactly. All the prayers H and I offered and all the false hopes we had. Those moments where it seemed like things are getting better, only for the cancer to return. He felt like they were being deliberately led up the garden path, set up for the next torture.
It's the hope that makes the eventual pain worse.
Precisely. The perceived cruelty isn't just the illness, it's the intermittent hope that makes the final blow so much more agonizing. But he does wrestle with this cosmic sadist idea. He doesn't ultimately land there.
Why not? What pulls him back?
He eventually dismisses it as too anthropomorphic, too human, almost childishly simple in a dark way. Worse even than the simplistic image of God as an old man with a beard.
And his reason is quite profound.
It is. He argues, basically, that pure spite, pure sadism can't create. It can only spoil or destroy. A cosmic sadist couldn't have come up with things like love or laughter or daffodils. The sheer, undeniable beauty and goodness in the world contradicts the idea of a purely malevolent creator.
So the horror serves a purpose.
Yeah.
It forces him to reevaluate his faith itself.
Absolutely. The crisis reveals the fragility of what came before. He realizes his previous faith, even the carefully constructed arguments in the problem of pain, was maybe just imagination. like playing with toy soldiers labeled pain, death, illness, not the real thing.
Which brings us to that brilliant analogy he uses, the rope.
Yes, the rope test. So simple, so powerful. It's easy to say you trust a rope when you're just using it to tie up a parcel. Low stakes.
But if you have to hang over a cliff edge, relying on that same rope.
That's when you find out how much you truly trust it. Real risk tests the reality of a belief. He saw that his belief in God's goodness in the afterlife had seemed strong, mainly because it hadn't really mattered desperately before whether it was true or not. Grief made it matter, infinitely.
So the suffering was necessary to expose the weakness.
That's his conclusion. He felt he had to be knocked silly before he comes to his senses. Only the torture, as he calls it, could reveal the truth of his own beliefs. It wasn't that God was a sadist. It was that Lewis's own faith needed that kind of extreme pressure to be tested and ultimately purified. His house of cards had to fall.
And this feeling of being exposed, it even affects how he prays, especially for H.
Yes, that's another fascinating aspect. He finds he can pray for others who have died his mother, friends without difficulty. But when he turns to pray for H specifically, he just stops. He feels this ghastly sense of unreality, like talking about someone who isn't there, into a void.
Why the difference? Lengel has thoughts on this, right?
She does. She suggests it's because the beloved, the spouse, is so much a part of ourselves that we do not have the perspective of distance. Praying for H feels like praying for part of his own heart, his own being.
How do you pray for something that's integral to you rather than separate from you?
Exactly. It breaks the usual model of prayer as intercession for someone else. The intimacy is too profound. The usual theological tools don't quite seem to fit the lived experience of that particular loss. It's another way the grief challenges all his previous frameworks.
So as Lewis keeps writing in this notebook, you actually see his perspective start to shift, don't you?
Yeah.
Grief isn't static. It changes. And one of the first big shifts is around his fear about memory.
Yes, that initial terror about losing the real H. He's so afraid his memory will soften her, idealize her, turn her into a more and more imaginary woman, a mere doll shaped by his own needs and wishes.
Because the actual person isn't there to correct him anymore.
Precisely. He treasured that constant impact of something very close and intimate, yet all the time unmistakably other, resistant, in a word, real. That otherness was crucial. Without it, he feared she'd just dissolve back into one of his old bachelor pipe dreams. He didn't want a comfortable fantasy. He wanted her.
Which is why he rejects that whole idea of the dead living on in our memory.
Fiercely rejects it. He finds it sentimental and untrue. Memory, the corpse, the ghost, he calls them, mockeries or horrors. Just different ways of spelling dead. Loving his idea of H felt like a betrayal of the real H.
And he makes that really interesting connection to the man tending the grave in the churchyard.
Yeah, it's quite unexpected. Lewis himself admits he always disliked churchyard stuff. But he sees this laborer tending a simple flower-bed grave labeled Mum, and he wonders if maybe that man has it right.
Why? What's the difference?
Because the flower bed is real. It's an obstinate, resistant, often intractable bit of reality. You have to physically work with it, weed it, water it, deal with soil and weather. It pushes back.
Unlike an image in your head.
Exactly. The image in his mind is a puppet of which you hold the strings. It does what he wants. The flowerbed demands engagement with something outside himself. So the laborer, by tending something real, might be connecting more truly to the reality of his mother than Lewis was by wrestling with his internal image.
That's a powerful thought. And this leads him to see grief itself differently, too. Not as a state, but a process.
Yes, that's a key transition. Sorrow turns out to be not a state, but a process. It's not a fixed condition you just endure. It's a journey. It doesn't need a map, he says. It needs a history. He pictures it as a long valley, a winding valley where any bend may reveal a totally new landscape.
So you never quite know what's coming next.
Right. You think you've reached a plateau, maybe you're getting used to it, and then you round a corner and suddenly the view is completely different. Maybe a new wave of pain, maybe unexpected peace, maybe just emptiness again. It keeps evolving.
But the pain still comes back, right? It's not a smooth progression.
Oh, absolutely not. He's very clear about that. The same leg is cut off time after time, that initial brutal shock, the first plunge of the knife into the flesh. It gets felt again and again.
He uses that amputation analogy again here, doesn't he? The wooden leg.
He does. It's so effective. A man loses his leg. The wound heals. The worst of the immediate pain stops. He gets a prosthetic. He's got over it, in one sense.
But he's not the same.
Never. He's now a one-legged man, Life is permanently different. He'll probably have phantom pains, aches in the stump forever. He'll never be a biped again. Recovery isn't going back to how things were. It's adapting to a permanently altered reality.
And this leads him to articulate what he sees as the ultimate danger, the worst possible outcome of bereavement.
Yeah, this is a really profound fear for him. He worries he might eventually reach a point where his marriage to H, those intense years of love, just seem like a charming episode, like a holiday.
Something that briefly interrupted his normal life.
Exactly. Something that interrupted his interminable life and then returned him to it fundamentally unchanged. That would be the real tragedy.
Becoming normal again would mean she hadn't truly changed him. It would be like a second death for her in his life.
Precisely. He'd rather keep feeling the ache, the difference, because that proves her enduring impact, her reality. Forgetting, becoming numb, trivializing it, that's the bereavement he truly fears.
So this fear pushes him towards a radical rethinking of what bereavement even is in the context of marriage.
It really does. He starts to propose that maybe bereavement isn't the end of the marriage, not a cutting short, but actually one of its regular phases, like the honeymoon.
Yes.
Just the next stage.
Wow. So the marriage continues even after death.
That's the implication. The love still exists, the bond is still there, but the form of the relationship has entered a new, admittedly painful phase. And the task becomes how to live faithfully within that phase. It reframes the pain not as punishment, but as part of the ongoing commitment.
And this leads to that paradox he discovers about intense mourning.
Yes, this is huge. He finds that passionate grief does not link us with the dead, but cuts us off from them. All his desperate wanting, his frantic need for her, was actually creating the barrier.
So the harder he tried to feel close, the further away she seemed.
It seems so. It's only when that desperate, passionate grief starts to calm down a bit, when he's not frantically trying to grasp her, that he feels closer, nearer to her full reality, her otherness.
And that's when he has that experience. Not a vision, exactly.
No, not a ghost or a voice. He describes it as an unobtrusive but massive sense that she is, just as much as ever, a fact to be taken into account. A sudden, calm certainty of her continued existence.
And he realizes the barrier wasn't her absence, but his own need.
Yes, his own frantic need that slammed at the door in my face. When the need became less frantic, less demanding, the sense of her presence could somehow get through.
But what's really striking is how unemotional he says his experience was.
Incredibly unemotional, he emphasizes that.
Yeah.
Not at all like a rapturous reunion of lovers. There was no sentimentality, no gushing feeling.
What was it like then?
He compares it to getting a telephone call or a wire from her about some practical arrangement, like totally matter of fact. He uses words like brisk, cheerful, keen, alert, intense, wide awake.
Pure intellect. Pure reality.
Oh, almost, yeah. And utterly reliable. It felt solid, real, precisely because it wasn't clouded by his own emotions or desires. It was just her distinct, separate reality making itself known.
Which leads him to wonder about the nature of love itself.
Right. Maybe love in its essential, eternal form isn't actually an emotion at all. Maybe the emotions we associate with it, the passion, the longing, the tenderness, are just necessary for us now because we have animal souls and nervous systems.
But the core connection might be something else. Something more like that intellectual, factual communion he experienced.
That seems to be what he's contemplating. A connection based on pure being, pure reality, separate from the fluctuations of feeling. And that unemotional intellectual contact felt more real, more restorative than any amount of passionate mourning had. It was based on her, not him. So as we pull these threads together from Lewis's journey through the journal, you see this significant shift completed. His mind isn't hitting that locked door anymore when he thinks of God.
And it's not hitting a vacuum when he thinks of H either.
Exactly. He moves beyond just documenting his own pain. The focus changes. It's less about his suffering and more about, about praise.
Praising God as the giver and H is the gift. That's a big change from the cosmic sadist phase.
A huge change. He starts to see H differently too. Not just as someone lost, but almost like a finished creation. He uses the image of a sword.
A sword. How does that work?
He suggests their life together. The intense joy and pain was the tempering process, the forging in the furnace. But now maybe the sword is finished. God grasps the hilt, weighs the new weapon, makes lightnings with it in the air. She's moved on to a different kind of existence, a different purpose he can't fully grasp.
It's a way of affirming her continued reality and purpose, even in absence.
Precisely. And underlying all of this is the unifying theme that emerges so strongly at the end. reality and God as the great iconoclast.
The image breaker.
Yes, that concept becomes central. An iconoclast smashes idols, breaks false images. Lewis realizes that all our neat human ideas, our comfortable pictures of what God is like, our sentimental notions about love, our assumptions about what happens after death, they all have to be broken.
Why? Why the need for shattering?
Because our ideas aren't the reality. They're just limited human constructs. God, truth, reality itself is always bigger, wilder, more real than our concepts. So those concepts have to be shattered time after time to let the actual reality shine through.
He says even earthly love is iconoclastic, right? The real person breaking your idea of them.
Exactly. The beloved incessantly triumphs over your mere idea of her. You don't fall in love with a perfect image. You love the real person with all their quirks, their resistance, their otherness. That resistant reality is what makes it real love.
So loving H now, in her absence, becomes more like loving God.
That's his stunning conclusion, because both H in her current state and God are ultimately incomprehensible and unimaginable. He can't form a neat picture of either anymore. Love has to move beyond images, beyond graspable concepts, into trust in a reality he can't fully perceive.
So when he brings his big questions back to God about why this happened, about reunion, what answer does he get?
He describes it as a rather special sort of no answer. It's not the harsh silence of the slammed door from earlier.
What is it then?
It's more like a silent, certainly not uncompassionate gaze. As if God shook his head, not in refusal, but waving the question, like saying, "Peace, child, you don't understand."
Implying the questions themselves might be flawed, or the answers are just beyond human comprehension right now.
That seems to be the sense. Like asking a toddler about quantum physics. The framework isn't there for the answer to make sense. So Lewis is left realizing that maybe many of our deep theological struggles are based on asking the wrong questions, or questions that simply can't be answered from our current perspective.
So what's left? Just the practical stuff.
Pretty much. He's left with the two great commandments: loving God, however incomprehensible, and loving his neighbor. The practical, ethical demands of faith. The rest, maybe it's just not my business right now.
And he finishes the journal with this really powerful meditation on what God might be trying to achieve with humanity.
Yeah, this idea of God's grand enterprise to make a spiritual animal.
Making us, as primates, as beasts with nerve endings all over it, attached to earthly things.
And saying, now get on with it. Become a god. Transform into something beyond the purely physical, the purely instinctual.
And that process, he suggests, has to involve pain.
It seems unavoidable, because becoming that spiritual animal requires detaching from purely earthly comforts, from self-possession, from the things the primate clings to. That process of detachment, of transformation, is inherently painful. He suspects the operation is probably even more painful than we can conceive, but he holds on to that ultimate hope, borrowing from Julian of Norwich.
All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Despite the pain, despite the confusion, there's an underlying trust in a good outcome.
It's an incredible arc. From the depths of despair and doubt, the slammed door, the cosmic sadist, to this place of hard-won trust, acceptance of mystery, and focus on the transformative potential of suffering itself.
It really is. And if C.S. Lewis, this giant of Christian thought, could have his whole structure shaken like this, could face such raw doubt and anger, it kind of gives the rest of us permission, doesn't it?
Permission to be honest. Permission to admit when we don't understand, when we are angry, when faith feels impossible. Lewis shows that wrestling, questioning, even despairing can be part of the journey, not necessarily the end of it.
And that final thought he leaves us with? If his own faith only revealed its true substance under extreme pressure, like testing that rope over the precipice.
It really does make you pause and ask yourself, doesn't it? Those beliefs you hold, maybe comfortably, maybe untested. How much do you really trust that rope? How would your own house of cards stand up if reality truly pushed back? It's a challenging thought to end on.
A very challenging thought. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into C.S. Lewis's raw, courageous journey through a grief observed.